Salutations Rangers, General Bradley 101 back again with some more lore. And in today's video, boys and gals, we're back with what our people get wrong about X series. And today we're talking about the Raven Guard, the shadowy sons of deliverance. So strap on and buckle up, and let's get talking on about today's video. TLDR about the Raven Guard. The Raven Guard are the 19th Legion as Astartes, and they hail from the world of Kiowa, / its moon of deliverance. More specifically, that's where their Primarch, Corvus Corax, hailed from, for that was the planet that Corvus landed on. However, he didn't land into a coshy place. It turns out that Deliverance, and Kiowa to an extent, was ruled by Tellanic despots, who employed various amounts of slave labor. Basically, political prisoners. If you didn't agree with the government, you were thrown in the gulag. So he ended up being raised by these prisoners, and he eventually became sort of a freedom fighter, and eventually he would lead his worlds to overthrow the tyrants and establish a true society upon the world of deliverance, with a little help from the Emperor, which he then met. He would then go on and establish the Raven Guard proper. He would do many changes of his legion. Originally, the Terran-born Raven Guard, made up of various tribes of old Earth, were used as a type of secret police, counter-revolt and repression duties, specifically cracking down on rebelling populace, things which Corax was against. Thus, he did end up exiling a large bunch of his legion, mostly Terran-born, which are believed to form the renegade chapter known as the Ashen Claws, and the Kakarion Asta Space Marine chapter. The Raven Guard will then continue in their efforts across the entirety of the Great Crusade, fighting in a very unique manner, employing stealth, hit and run, ambush, and asymmetrical warfare. Tactics which are very much uncommon to the heavy-duty assault shock troopers that were the Adeptus Astartes. But, regardless of how they fought, the Legion excelled, and they would serve dutifully throughout the entirety of the Great Crusade. However, their role in the heresy would be cut short, as they would become part of the shattered legions of Istvan, with them alongside the Iron Hands and the Salamanders being caught in a devastating crossfire between the traitor legions, resulting in them not really having much to do. However, after the end of heresy, the Raven Guard would be divvied up into its various chapter elements, and would continue to serve the Imperium dutifully and loyally throughout its entirety of its years. They have regularly accepted the Primarch Marines and continue operating from their homeworld of deliverance. In terms of theming as well as what they're about, they are very much about an asymmetrical style of warfare. They are the sneaky spec up Marines, but unlike the Alpha Legion, which are more like secret agents, these are more like in the field type guys, special operations type stuff. In terms of cultural theming, they seem to draw heavily from sorts of tribal inspirations, including both Celtic and Native American. Not necessarily one specific tribal epithet, but more so a blending mix of the whole idea of tribal society. So TLDR done. But now that begs the question, what exactly do people get wrong about the Raven Guard? And quite simply, they're freedom fighters. Now, before I can expand upon this idea, a little bit of a preface. Upon doing research into this video, there is a large discourse, much more discourse than I ever thought, about the Raven Guard. More specifically, about them being hypocrites. As I mentioned before, Corvus fought the world of deliverance. He overthrew his slave trading masters, and he freed the slaves. That's his whole point. He's a freedom fighter, he liberated his people. But people call him a hypocrite and the Raven Guard hypocrites because they serve the Imperium, which is a very tyrannical state. And their logic goes as such. Corax is not a true freedom fighter, he just chooses sides. So since he decided to side with the Emperor, that then does not make him a freedom fighter, that then just makes him a tyrannical lackey, or a hypocrite. Now, on face value, this makes sense. The problem is though that's on face value. As with anything with the Legions, anything in Warhammer 40k, and with this series, when you look further, the answer is much more complicated than that. And, generally speaking, much more different. When looking into this, you see that a lot of quote-unquote good legions, so things like the Raven Guard, Salamanders, Ultramarines, Blood Angels, etc., there ends up being a lot of hatred for them. Now when I say hatred, I mean not necessarily a vehement vitriolic rage that some people have with say something like John Dramaticus, but it's much more of a judging hatred. More specifically, when you say that the Ultramarines run a good society, when you say that the Salamanders care for civilians, when you say the Raven Guard are freedom fighters, when you say the Blood Angels are noble but tragic, you will usually get somebody who immediately will point at you, look and say, no, you're wrong actually. Here is this piece of information that I found from God Almighty knows where, and it proves without a doubt that the Ultramarines are terrible administrators, the Raven Guard are hypocritical bastards, the Salamanders actually love killing children, and the Blood Angels are not noble at all, they're bloodthirsty vampires who are murderers. And there's a connection between all these people and all these various topics. If you ever mention anything positive about a faction in Warhammer 40k, these people will then come out of the woodworks and denounce you. Now, why is that the case? Quite simply, a big attraction to a lot of people is that Warhammer 40k is so dejected. It's terrible. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. The whole tagline, the whole opening paragraph, all that with the setting, it's not supposed to be nice. It's not a good place to live. But even with the people who really enjoy that hopelessness about it, they end up getting something wrong. People think that for a setting to be terrifying, to be horrible, it has to always be horrible. And that's just wholly incorrect. If Warhammer 40k was a setting where every single person, every single moment of every single time was in abject horror, where everything just sucked, the setting would be lame. Why? Because the most soul-crushing of pain, the most terrible bits of horror come when light that is so close you can taste it is snatched away from you. You can make an argument that living in a slave state, for example, right, 1% are the super elite and everyone else is just slaves. Let's say that's a world. Yes, that is grimdark and that's a terrible dystopian fate. But I would argue that if there was indeed a civilized world, like our world, where relatively speaking, the large majority of people live happy lives. You know, it's good, it's fine, it's chill, it's nice. A lot of people will look at it and say, oh no, that's not grimdark. Now, that in of itself is not grimdark, yes. But that's the thing though, you're only looking at it in a vacuum, that one particular event. What's grimdark about it is that these people who don't even know that Xenos exist, who don't really even know that the Imperium exists, all they know is that there is this ship that comes once every few years to pick up a bunch of stuff. Simple as. All of a sudden, warp portal opens on the planet, and it's invaded by demons. Imagine our world, invaded by actual demonic entities all of a sudden without warning, and the world is ruined. The fact that a world like ours, that is calm, decent, and nice, can in an instant be snuffed out and destroyed and turned into a demonic hellscape, that is true horror. And in my opinion, that is truly grimdark. The fact that the smallest bit of light can be eradicated at any moment. And that's a problem with a lot of these people. Generally speaking, you get a lot of new people coming in the hobby, especially in the past 10 years. And, generally speaking, sometimes they interpret lore wrong. I know that's a very dangerous way to say it, but you know, that is the case. They don't understand that Warhammer is not meant to make sense. It's meant to be dumb, it's meant to be stupid, and it's meant to be terrible. So you get a lot of people asking these questions and they may think that the Imperial Guard isn't really that bad, and they'll go on and on and on. So you get this old guard, these people who just vehemently despise anything and all positive, because them, Warhammer 40k is only evil, period. But that's only because they only look at things in a vacuum. Hence why they will argue so strongly that something like the Raven Guard aren't true freedom fighters. No, they're evil hypocrites. But that's not it. Are the Raven Guard hypocritical? A little bit, yeah. But it's not because they willingly choose to be evil. A big mistake that a lot of people make when talking about Primarchs is that they believe that all of them believed in conquest. They believed in the Great Crusade wholeheartedly, that, you know, this was the best thing ever. That is objectively wrong. There were indeed those, like Russ and the Lion, who wholeheartedly believed that the Great Crusade was the best thing. But there were others who accepted it as the best course of action currently. And there were even others who did it just because their father told them. Biggie was their creator, he was their father, they owed him fealty, so that's why they did it. Think about people like Vulcan as well as Perturabo. They didn't necessarily want to become generals, but they did it because their father told them. They were called to serve and they answered. People like Gilliman and Fulgrim, they didn't necessarily agree wholeheartedly that this was the best course of action, but they knew that it was the course of action that was there, and they saw that how it could benefit them, so they went with it. But then you get people like Corax and the Khan, both who, genuinely speaking, hated the idea of the Great Crusade and opposed it. But they both sided with the Emperor. Why? Because at the end of the day, the Emperor was the best thing for humanity. People often say the Emperor is a despotic, evil tyrant, and yes, compared to our history, 100%. Some would argue that even in 40k he is. And there's an argument there, I won't deny there's not. I'm not a big fan of the Emperor. But ask yourselves this question. What was humanity before the Emperor came? Humanity had fallen. For over 5,000 years, humanity was preyed on by Xenos, warp entities, and its own depravity. There were indeed civilizations that were perfectly fine without the Imperium and would have continued to be perfectly fine, but there were just as many horrors of terrible destruction. Be it Xenos who actively wanted Imperium to die, like the Enslavers, or constructs of the Men of Iron that actively still wanted to kill the Imperium. There were even some human societies that had completely lost their shit. Thus, whilst Big E is not exactly the great idea, he was the idea that worked. You take a look at our own history, and this is something that a lot of people don't like to admit. Throughout time and time and time again, people who don't like each other, people who don't agree with each other, have come together to fight together for the sole fact it is the best option at this point in time. A prime example of this is World War II. The communists, as well as the Western world, did not like each other. But the fact of the matter is, they were being attacked by the Nazis. So, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So you side with the lesser of two evils, and then you deal with the aftermath of it. That is something that a lot of people just don't understand. Or they don't think of it when they're reading this lore. The Khan and Corax specifically sided with the Emperor not because they agreed with him, but because this was the best choice. Yeah, the Emperor wasn't exactly what you want, but when the other alternative is being lost in the darkness for 5,000 years, this is the best choice. And a big part of Corax's story is him coming to terms with the fact that, hey, this is not what I signed up for. This is not okay. Specifically in the novel, Deliverance Lost, he is called out on this. And he acknowledges that this is not what he signed up for. That this is not what he wants to be in. This is not what he wants his legion to be. But he understands that right now, this is all that can be done. Just think about it. What do you want Corax to do? Do you want him to take the Raven Guard and turn against the Emperor? What would happen then? Another heresy. What was the result of the heresy? Lo and behold, modern day 40k, which is significantly worse than 30k. Corax also reasoned that these worlds that were subjugated in the meantime would be restored and recovered over the course of centuries. In the aftermath of the Great Crusade, there was supposed to be a massive restructuring. Again, this is a sentiment that many Primarchs shared. Eventually, the war would end, and the warriors would become administrators and peacekeepers. Corax is very much a big ideas guy. Like many freedom fighters, he has one massive goal, but he often doesn't think of the aftermath of it. Thus, he will free a planet, but he won't think about the administration side of it. How to get resources back up and running, logistics, power, water, sanitation, food. He won't think about that. But he will be very good at liberating a planet. That's why Guilliman is such an effective Primarch. He thinks about all that. That's actually why Guilliman and Corax were actually quite friendly with each other, cause they both made up for each other's shortcoming. Sometimes Guilliman can miss the big picture with how practical he is, and sometimes Corax doesn't think of the pragmatism of his big picture. You put the two together, you get a good combo. So when looking into the Raven Guard and looking into Corax, people love to point and say, oh no, they're not actually freedom fighters. And it's like, no, they are freedom fighters, they are fighting for freedom. But in the same vein, they are making the best of a bad situation because that's what 40k is. You take a look at a lot of good people in Warhammer 40k. Caiaphas Cain, the Salamanders, Raven Guard, Ultramarines, some guard characters. They are not good people because they're actively making the world a better place. They're just making the best of a bad situation. They are trying their damnedest to make this hellhole just a little bit better. And to a lot of people, they consider that not being good. I'm sorry, you're in Warhammer 40k. You are not going to change everything. Things are not going to get better. You are not going to flip the Imperium into throwing away slavery wholesale. You are not going to stop the Imperium from tormenting its own citizens. What you can do, however, is ensure that this one world is free of this particular tyrannical governor who demanded a blood tithe. What you can do is ensure that this world and its people are evacuated and made safe. To me, it is incredibly short-sighted to say that, oh, they're not doing it to my definition of being a freedom fighter, being a good guy, being noble, being an administrator, so therefore it's not. The whole point of Warhammer 40k is that it sucks. So this is indeed freedom fighters in Warhammer 40k. These are indeed good guys. Because this is as much good as Warhammer 40k can get. It sucks. That's the point. But as the infantrymen in every military have learned and will continue to learn, you need to embrace the suck. Shit is fucked. But I can unfuck it a little bit and make today just a little bit less shit. And you know what? That's good enough for me. And that is what a lot of people miss. So the next time someone says that, oh, this faction isn't good or this faction doesn't do this good thing, remind them that they're only one small part of a faction and they can't change everything, and just because they can't change everything doesn't mean they're hypocrites. 40k is meant to suck ass. If everyone could change everything and make it better, it wouldn't be 40k now, would it? Ironically, that's what a lot of these people are afraid of, hence why they argument so vehemently against it. But then this point just reinforces that 40k is fucked. Again, when you look into 40k, make sure to remember the wider context of stuff. Just because one planet, one legion, one subfaction has something, doesn't mean the rest of the world does. Certainly doesn't mean that the rest of the universe does either. But with that preface out of the way, the Raven Guard are indeed freedom fighters. The Raven Guard and their whole ideal is that they are meant to be people who free others from tyrants. They are liberators of the lost. The Raven Guard are one of those legions that have suffered quite a lot in terms of just not getting any lore. Again, they are in the same boat as the Iron Hands and the Salamanders. For those of you wondering, in terms of the shafted list of Istvan, we have Iron Hands, Raven Guard, and then Salamanders, going from worst to best, or most shafted to least shafted. the Raven Guard fit in the middle. They do have some lore and some stories to them, but they haven't been expanded on. And they also suffer from memes a lot. People think that the Raven Guard are just the emo edgy boys, that's it, and they've been relegated to that. But that whole emo edginess doesn't come because they just choose to be, it comes also because they understand their situation. They are freedom fighters, forced to do evil. They understand that they're doing wrong, but they are the ends justify the means. Now that sentence is not true. Now yes, the result does matter, but at the end of the day, how you got here also matters. I am someone who's pragmatic, and I think that sometimes you can't always have it the good way. Sometimes you have to make compromises. But if you compromise on everything, well then you're not compromising anymore, you've just changed the way that you act. The Raven Guard are extremely dour, they're extremely sad. Because they understand that they are fighting in a world that is not good. In Warhammer 40k, they understood that they had to do acts of reprehensible behavior because they had to serve the Imperium. In 40k, they understand the Imperium is fucked, and humanity is fucked as a whole. So there's no exactly a hope for a brighter tomorrow when this orc is trying to shove his big ass axe down your throat. Pause. So they have to deal with this. Hence why they have such a dire circumstance and outlook to things. Freedom fighters are a very interesting tale, especially in our own world. Oftentimes they are loved and beloved and they end up overthrowing a corrupt regime. But generally speaking, what happens after that is more periods of instability. Oftentimes one civil war will follow another, because at the end of the day, like Corax, a lot of these people are big pictures, they're very idealist, but there's not really many pragmatic pencil drivers behind them. People who understand that, cool, grand, great, we have the government, but how do we make the government run? So when you have people like that in a place like Warhammer 40k, it makes sense why they end up being so sad. Because you have these big ideals, these beautiful things, and you go and you accomplish them, but in the aftermath, the people who are left to actually repair stuff and set up a government are people who send stuff called subjugation fleets regularly. I'd be a little depressed too. But that doesn't change the fact that the Raven Guard still believe in these good egalitarian ideas. They still hold fast to their belief that eventually things will get better. They, like their Primarch, are doing things, knowing that yes, everything may be bad now, I may be doing a lot of bad things, but eventually the end goal will be good. They work on hope, or faith, depending on how strongly you want to put it. The Raven Guard have always had faith. They've always hoped that the situation would get better. Now, a lot of people call that cope and they call them hypocrites for it, but there's a fine line between having hope that things will get better and actually being a hypocrite and not caring about it. And that really just comes down to personal taste. In my opinion, I believe that they are just hopeful. They understand that right now they can't make any sweeping changes to the Imperium as a whole, because in 30k it was still being conquered, and in 40k it's kinda fucked. But they still have that faith that eventually, one day, the Imperium will be what was promised. They will recover what was lost. And in the meantime, they're just going to make the best of a bad situation. Hence why in modern 40k, the Raven Guard are one of the few Adeptus Astartes Marines that actively put in time and effort into ensuring that planets of the Imperium are actually run properly, or acceptably, rather. The Raven Guard have a specific company, the 6th Company, known as the Blades of Darkness. And that company's sole job is to go from planet to planet and inspect it, to make sure that the planetary governor is not being Mr. Perfect Guy. They don't care about that. They care, is he being tyrannical? Is he being evil? And if he is indeed being tyrannical and evil, and when I say tyrannical and evil, I don't mean he's authoritarian, I mean he's actively calling for a blood tithe and taking people's firstborn. That's what I mean. The Raven Guard will deem him a threat, and the 6th Company will go in and they will kill him. They will kill his administration, and they will then just leave. Now, a lot of people will argue this does more harm than good. Now, of course, there will be a lot of people that argue this actually does more harm than good. And to those people, I say, in our modern context, probably. 9 times out of 10, that would be right. But in 40k, when you have people who are skinning babies, it's really hard to go worse than that. 40k is extreme, and the 6th Company will only act in very extreme cases. Again, make the best of a bad situation. The Raven Guard are only 1,000 Marines, the 6th Company only 100. You have to pick and choose your fights very carefully, because if you fight on every single world, if you overthrow every single planetary governor that isn't a perfect democratic egalitarian society, you are not going to be able to fight when you actually need to fight. Again, it's part of Warhammer 40k. Everything is fucked, so you can only unfuck the worst of the situations. So if stuff is just like okay, you have to leave it and accept it as good. But just because you do that doesn't mean you don't truly care. Again, as I've said, you're just making the best of a bad situation. And the Raven Guard have continued to do that. time and time again. They go out of their way to ensure that time and time again, whenever they conduct and operate in a manner, they try their best to 1. Limit the amount of civilian casualties, but 2. Limit the amount of destruction period. The Raven Guard are one of the most effective legions wholesale, because of just how smartly they use their manpower. But also it's a case of limiting collateral destruction, because it's again thinking about people. The Raven Guard are indeed freedom fighters. They fight for the people of the Imperium, and they fight for the ideals that their Primarch instilled in them. If they were in any other type of IP, they would be the best of the best men, but they're not. They're in Warhammer 40k where everything is cooked. So, they have to make the best of a bad situation. That doesn't mean that they're hypocrites, that doesn't mean that they're lying, that doesn't mean that they're failing, that doesn't mean any of that. It just means that despite everything going around them, they haven't lost hope. They haven't forgotten about who they are. They haven't forgotten about what it means. And, rather than give up and change, they'll go down swinging and they'll die trying. And sometimes that's a lot harder than simply just accepting that shit's fucked. So, the next time you look at the Raven Guard, remember, they are not just the emo edgelords. They are genuine, honest souls who care about the world around them. They have great ideals, but they've been wounded by the heresy, by the Imperium. For they understand that in the world they live in, their great ideals and their good deeds will not come to fruition, at least anytime soon. So instead of accepting that everything is terrible and just giving in to damnation and hellfire, they decide that they will do what they can, not in the bright light of front combat, but from the darkness of the shadows. They will use their abilities and all the means that they possess unto them to give some light into this devastating world. Because so long as there is even a flicker of a light in this world, then it is not truly covered in darkness. And to me, that is a very noble and a very worthy thing to fight for. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down below, what do you guys think? Did you guys know this about the Raven Guard? Do you agree? And also, do you agree to me when it comes to those people who feel like they just despise anything positive about Warhammer 40k? Let me know down below. Are you one of those people? Do you disagree with me? Why do you disagree with me? And just let me hear your thoughts below. But I want to say a massive thank you to you guys for watching, and even more massive thank you to my members and Patreons. And massive shout out to my Officer Core, my Lieutenant Tiers. Shout out Mr. Eddie V3 and Miss Major of the Void. Big shout out to all my Sergeant Tier fellas. Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Warsmith the Fireheart, Mr. Codes Butcher, and Mr. Sean IRL7. Shout out to my Corporal Tier members, Mr. Bowen and Tremail the Mouth Kitty. And finally, but certainly not least, big shout out to my Private Tier members, Mr. Thomas Mows Lawns, Mr. Ivan_SBW, Mr. Michael Hayeda, Mr. Hattori's Curse, and of course, Mr. Monkey Man. And very big shout out to my Patreon members, Mr. Fortus Unum, General Alexander, and Mr. Bulwin. Thank you also very much for watching. Oh yeah, by the way, Patreon is fixed. It basically matches the actual YouTube thing now. So if you guys want to go and support there for Patreon instead of YouTube, by all means, go ahead. I tried to get rid of it twice. It refused to die, so I've rewarded it. So yeah, it's kind of funky and wacky. But if you guys want to join these awesome guys and gals and help out your boy, you gain a bunch of awesome benefits, early access, behind the scenes stuff, help in making the channel run, votes, polls, member only stuff, and my enduring love and support. But remember, this will always be free. So whether you give me $1 or not, I will love you just the same. Mwah! Yes, I will. Also, keep a lookout. We got a couple big projects coming through this year, and they may or not involve some dice. So yeah, you know, little teaser. But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General A 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank y'all also very much for watching. Make sure to stay loyal out there, boys and gals. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. I am again going to get someone who's going to call me an idiot and a tourist. Why? Because I don't like hating, and I like explaining and understanding why things are. My god, no wonder people have a bad opinion of this community.